This podcast of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs is sponsored by AAA Heating and Air.
The premier HVAC company in the Midlands is growing. Are you a top HVAC technician?
AAA Heating and Air is looking for dedicated applicants to fill their fast-growing service department with top-notch HVAC technicians.
If you're the best, then they want you. If you're ready to stop working and start a career, you can earn up to $100,000 plus a year at AAA Heating and Air.
Quality candidates will have at least 2 years experience and a good driving record. Benefits include top industry salaries, commission on service and unit sales, set call limits, company-provided take-home vehicle and gas card, company-provided cell phone and tablet, health, dental, and vision benefits, 401k retirement plan with company match, and scaled PTO based on length of service.
Contact Roy and Dana Finley at 803-677-1500 or check out their job postings on Facebook or ZipRecruiter.
AAA Air when you need us. AAA Heating and Air.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, founded by firemen. With Chris Clark.
The 2007 South Carolina class was, at that time, 6th in the country and 4th in the SEC, which is amazing.
Wes Mitchell.
You know, I think if you're South Carolina, you're aiming to at least be at 50%. Then in theory, you're adding talent, you're getting better, you're putting yourself in a position to compete.
And Tyler Head.
It's been a great week for South Carolina. On the recruiting front, still certainly plenty to talk about.
On the home of the Gamecocks, 107.5 The Game.
And welcome into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on 107.5 The Game. Tyler Head and Chris Clark along with you today. Wes Mitchell, I'm assuming he'll be back in with us tomorrow.
He will.
But he unfortunately missed out on the Coach Annan conversation. That hour went by really fast.
Yeah, Coach Annan was great as always. I'm glad he was here to carry us. We should have. Unfortunately, he couldn't stay. He had some things to do. I wish he could have joined us on this program so he can make us look better, Tyler. Make us look like we know what we're doing.
I mean, he's a pro.
He is a pro. He has probably been in here almost as much as me, only because I'm generally here Monday through Friday for an hour and then Tuesday and Thursday for another hour, but he's close.
I want to say the first ever thing I listened to on this station was him on the early game with Bill one morning.
Yeah.
And I was like, is this guy the co-host? Oh, he's the head soccer coach. Okay.
Both.
Yeah.
Same thing. No, that was hilarious. For those of you who didn't get to tune in, and Tyler will have the full conversation up on the 1075thegame.com podcast page later. That's the Garnet Trust Hour every Tuesday and Thursday. So appreciate Coach joining us again. But he mentioned at the Welcome Home Tour last night, Columbia, I think it was a merger of Columbia and Lexington, right across from Williams-Brice Stadium. And really good crowd there. I think he said 300. I think I've heard other people say about 350 people. So Shane Beamer, Lamont Paris, Tony Annan, all there, all speaking with the crowd. And it was a big hit. Tony Annan always does a great job in those scenarios. But he said he had people come through the line to talk to him and get him to sign things. And that most of them mentioned, hey, I enjoy listening to you on 107.5. And he's like, what about soccer?
You know, it's a step to getting people to come to games, though.
Well,
because now they have more of an interest in coming from having heard him on here.
Yeah, they're like, this guy's cool. And I want to go support his team, go check out his team. There's going to be some people there that have not maybe ever checked out a game at Stone Stadium. So,
and I hear that's a fun environment out there.
So it's a really cool environment. There have been some great nights, great matches there historically. And I really think Tyler, with his background, you can look at some of the building jobs or rebuilding jobs that he's done, his professional affiliations, just how much better this team has already gotten, how much more competitive they are. But like you even look at, we had the question earlier about the Clemson game and being more competitive against Clemson. You look at year one or 2021, I think that game was 5-0. Carolina ends up playing the game with 9 guys. They're down a couple men. And then you look at last year with that great Clemson team, number 1 at the time, and it's a 1-0 game where you outplay them for most of the game. You lose, but the difference in competitiveness in just 1 year, and Clemson's been good, for quite a while, obviously. It was tremendous. So I think getting a lot closer, and I think he's going to do some really good things with this program. He's just done it. He's also done a really good job. Like we always talk about how Shane Beamer has done a phenomenal job of just getting himself into the community, the Gamecock fan community, the Midlands, Columbia. Tony Annan has done that as well. I think you look at the amount of times he's willing to come and hang out with Bill and Jay, which that's a rough crowd to hang out with, so to endure that. But in all seriousness, to be able to do that, to be willing to do that, spend time. He's done a great job with donors, fundraising for his program, of course. I think he's going to do some really good things. And the interest is picking up. He mentioned that, and even had some fans bring soccer balls last night instead of a football. So Shane Beamer, we'll have to ask Shane Beamer about that at some point. Beamer and Paris signing a soccer ball instead of a football.
Right. Well, in terms of him, rebuilding the soccer program here, and as he mentioned, there is no SEC men's soccer because there's only a handful of schools in the SEC that support that. And I think it's only Kentucky and South Carolina that do have a men's soccer team. So they play in the Sun Belt, which has a mix of different schools from all over the traditional conferences that we know from football, baseball, and basketball and stuff like that. So you're looking at it, Sun Belt men's soccer, and you have the Kentuckys of the world, Georgia State's, Marshalls that are, very good and consistently good. So and as he mentioned, Sun Belt is maybe the second best league, maybe even on par with ACC soccer. So it's not an overnight thing in terms of rebuilding and becoming a power within your own conference. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but obviously taking steps in the right direction.
Well, and you look at, I'll be honest, Tyler, I can't remember if that was the most recent title game or the one before, but Clemson and Marshall were in the title game, and those teams are on South Carolina's schedule because Clemson in the ACC is South Carolina's rival, and Marshall plays in the Sun Belt. And you look at last season, then Kentucky. Kentucky was number 2 when South Carolina played them at the end of the regular season and in the Sun Belt tournament. Marshall was number 6 during the regular season, and Clemson was number 1 when South Carolina played them. And it was a mixed bag in terms of the results, but they were competitive in the Sun Belt game against Kentucky. They were competitive against Clemson in that game. So he's definitely leveled that up.
You mentioned the welcome home event last night, and again, all the coaches were out there. You said about 300 people were in attendance, and Beamer spoke, and we had the opportunity to get a little bit of sound for him. I believe Wes is the one that put the video up for GamecockCentral.com last night, but we got a couple of sound bites from him, and that allows us to play our favorite game here on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, and that is spinning the wheel of Beamer. So I'm going to go ahead and give the wheel a spin and see where it lands. All right, so this is going to be Shane Beamer talking about the differences in hitting the portal before spring and after spring. As we know, of course, South Carolina trying to fill some needs at the running back and edge positions. Particularly, here's what Beamer had to say last night.
You probably know a little bit more about your team. The only thing is when you're going after, when you're recruiting, Trey Knox or Spencer Rattler or Josh Simon or Juice Wells, you only know what you know about them from watching them on tape, and you haven't even seen your other freshmen that you're bringing in. If you're doing it after the portal, you've got a much better idea about your own team because you've seen your team, and it's pretty much set except for a few guys here or there. So that's probably the biggest thing. You really know, okay, this freshman we think is going to be able to help us, this transfer is going to be able to help us, or, okay, this freshman may be a little bit farther away, and this position is maybe a little bit more of a position of need now because of it. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just having a better idea about your team.
And again, that's Coach Beamer last night at the Welcome Home event, speaking about the difference between looking at the transfer portal before spring and after spring. And what he said makes a lot of sense, where now that you run through spring practice, the spring game, you get a sense of, with the pieces that you have now, especially the ones that you've added in the transfer portal and obviously the early enrollees, you get a better idea of, okay, here's what we just need for right now and need to add over the next, few weeks or whatever prior to, the summer sessions and getting into the fall.
Yeah, and the guys that he mentioned, and I think those guys were Trey Knox, different classes, right? But similar examples. Trey Knox, Spencer Rattler, Juice Wells, Josh Simon. These are guys that you bring in different classes as mid-year enrollees. And in most instances, Tyler, certainly in all those instances, you kind of know what the void is. You know that you need a quarterback with Spencer Rattler. You know that in the case of Knox and Simon in this past class, your entire tight end room has cleared out, right? So that's a little bit different of a scenario even. And then Juice Wells, you know that you need some help at receiver. But, Beamer had seen, obviously, Spencer Rattler during his time at Oklahoma. He had more familiarity with him. But those other guys, you're recruiting, as Beamer said, off of tape and off of what you've seen. Juice Wells, Beamer has, obviously a prior relationship with his former high school coach in Richmond. Josh Simon's an in-state kid who played at Crestwood and Sumter. Trey Knox is someone who Dowell Loggins, now your OC, was the position coach for at Arkansas. So this is what you typically see. I actually talked to somebody in the personnel game, not at South Carolina the other day, Tyler, and they made a great point. They said your greatest successes in the transfer portal are with guys that you have a previous tie to or more familiarity with. When you're taking just a flyer on a guy, sometimes it works out, but you don't know as much. And even with Rattler and Wells and Knox and Simon, to some degree, you're still not quite sure, like, how are they going to integrate? What will the competition look like when you get them in? Again, for most of those guys that we mentioned, they're going to be able to step in and play a huge role immediately, if not start. And I think we'll see that with Knox and Simon. They're going to play a ton. Rattler was your immediate starter. Juice Wells immediately jumped into the fray and now is the best receiver, the most proven receiver on Carolina's team. But when you measure it up against this transfer portal window now that just closed, and again, graduates can enter at any time. We'll see more activity probably this summer on that front. But it's a little bit different because now they've got tight ends in the room now. You get a better look at, what do we think about running back? Maybe we thought that we absolutely had to get 2 running backs out of the portal before the spring. They obviously still think they need 1, but it seems like they feel better about that position overall. It changes your equation even at offensive line, Tyler, because you had the injury to Jalen Nichols. So going through winter workouts after the December transfer portal window, the player run practices, then going through spring ball, it can change your outlook on what you think of your team and what you've got.
Right. We'll give the wheel another spin on the other side. Let's hear a little bit more from what Shane Beamer had to say yesterday at the Welcome Home event. You are listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. 107.5 The Game.
Yes, this program is brought to you by Larry Chandler, proprietor of all 14 Midlands Firehouse Subs locations. And Tyler, we're very excited today because if you hadn't checked your calendar, your watch, your phone, whatever, it is Tuesday, May the 9th. And that means
favorite.
It is Tyler's favorite, Juice Wells' favorite. It's a favorite of everyone. It's TBR Tuesday, and that is Turkey Bacon Ranch. That is the sub of the day today at Firehouse Subs. You can get it at all 14 of the Midlands Firehouse Subs locations. If you want to find the one closest to you, go to firehousesubs.com. They've got a great map. You can search by zip code. If you're in Sumter, you can get it there. If you're in Orangeburg, you can get it there. Columbia, anywhere around the Midlands, you can get the sub of the day every single day, Monday through Sunday. That's $7.99 for a medium, $5.99 for a small. I recommend the medium. You'll need it. You'll want it, especially on Turkey Bacon Ranch. Tuesday, that is the sub of the day at Firehouse Subs. Again, that's firehousesubs.com, or go to the App Store or Google Play and download the Firehouse Subs app to order your sub of the day and start earning points on all of your purchases. That's Firehouse Subs, sub of the day, the Turkey Bacon Ranch.
More sound from Coach Beamer on the other side. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5 The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on 107.5 The Game. Tyler Head and Chris Clark along with you on this Tuesday morning, continuing to listen to a little bit of audio from Shane Beamer as he spoke before last night's Midlands Welcome Home event, touching on a number of topics regarding the South Carolina football team. I gave the wheel a spin during the break to decide what our next audio clip was going to be, and this ended up being the first question that he got asked last night by Wes, and it's the biggest issue the biggest story going on with the South Carolina football team right now in regards to the left tackle position, with Jalen Nichols being out for a extended period of time. Here's what Beamer had to say about it.
Quite a few guys that, have some position flexibility that worked out there during spring practice. That's the way we always try and do things, is the more you can do, the better. So whether it's playing guard and tackle, whether it's playing left side and right side, whether it's playing center and guard, we try and work guys all over the place. So, I'd say there's a handful of guys that certainly can do that, and that'll be something that we'll continue to work over the summer as well.
And while Beamer didn't specifically name any names, we know there's obviously been an influx of guys joining the offensive line from the transfer portal, and obviously have new additions on campus as well. The prevailing thought is that it would be Ja'Kai Moore, more likely than not, that would step into this left tackle spot and take Jalen Nichols' place.
Shout out to Wes Mitchell, getting himself some airtime.
Even when he's not here.
Even when he's not here. Good question by Wes, and an important question. So it's interesting to look at the layout of the offensive line now, because we know that Jalen Nichols' loss, which will be, Tyler, very much appears, if not the whole season, most of it, because of when the injury occurred. I mean, right at the end of spring practice.
Right.
Hate it for Nichols as a senior, hate it for the team. And he's a guy that has experience playing left tackle and guard. I think that's kind of maybe an underrated, undervalued part of this, is that if something happened to one of your other players, you could always slide Jalen Nichols to guard if you really wanted. As it was, they really settled on this combination at the end of the season of Ja'Kai Moore at left guard, Nichols at left tackle. That seemed to work for them. There was obviously some other things that clicked. I think the first game that they did that combination in was the Florida game. So if you looked at it based on that, you said it didn't work at all. But it certainly was effective for them at the end of the season. And so it takes away a starter. It takes away someone with versatility. And then it also forces you to move somebody else to left tackle. And so the natural place to go is Ja'Kai Moore, because he started last season out as a left tackle. He has experience there. But that now dips into your depth. It really affects everything. Because it's not just, okay, I know we beat this to death basically, but on the offensive line, the way that teams structure it now, it's not just, okay, let's look at the depth chart and who's the backup left tackle. You see that sometimes, but oftentimes it's a guy, and this has been the case a lot at South Carolina, that just can play both. Who is your next best guy at each given spot? And a lot of times you see a sixth or seventh guy who's just kind of a swing player. And so fortunately for South Carolina, it's still a question mark. It's not as big of one as it could be, because you do have a guy in Ja'Kai Moore who's played a lot of football and actually has in-game experience and practice experience at left tackle. It's not just a complete experiment. It's not a complete Hail Mary to put him out there. Now, I do think what that means is, the combination that we saw to start the spring of Vershawn Lee and Nick Gargiulo playing side by side, Lee at center, Gargiulo at guard, it seems very, very likely that will continue, or you could even flip-flop those guys. Interestingly, Tyler, those three guys that I mentioned, Moore, Lee, Gargiulo, they all have left tackle experience. I don't recall either of them getting reps this spring, Gargiulo or Lee, at left tackle, but Gargiulo played it at Yale, and Vershawn Lee has played it at South Carolina his very first year, which was, I believe, 2020, freshman season. He actually started his career as a left tackle. So they do have some versatility there, but it really dips into your depth, and now things aren't quite according to plan. You're going to need to have somebody slide up into that top 6, 7, 8. Is that a Cason Henry, who got a cup of coffee last season as a left tackle? Is it Marquis Anderson, maybe playing a little bit more even than you anticipated at a guard spot?
right?
To give you some depth. It'll be interesting to see.
Well, and now knowing that this injury is going to put Nichols on the shelf for a while, is this a position that maybe you address in the transfer portal now?
Well, it's been one. South Carolina's made a run, right? We've seen this at a few positions, actually. There weren't a lot that has gone under discussed. There was an offer or two out to a receiver, at the receiver position. That's not one that's been a huge priority. There have been a couple guys that they've offered there. Linebacker, DB. We've seen a couple offers go out in the portal there, and I'm counting the last window and the most recent window in saying that. But obviously the priority has been running back and edge, as we've said. But I think number 3, Tyler, where you would put offensive line in there, there was even some digging around before the Nichols injury. So Wes makes this point all the time that it's tough to find a big-time offensive lineman that you can slot in there because those guys are normally starters, and
right.
It's a different position than quarterback or running back. Some running backs who are starters say, I'm not getting the ball enough, or I'm not being used correctly. Different for offensive linemen, right? If you're starting and you're generally happy, you're doing well, and you're an upperclassman, you're either usually doing your one more year or you're going pro. We've seen a few that have stepped out and moved on, but not many. It's a little bit different from that standpoint. What you also see, Tyler, is the market becomes very, because there's so few of them, it's a race. You see offensive linemen jump in the portal that aren't big-time players. These aren't first-round NFL draft projections, but they jump in, and if they have experience and they're pretty solid, they're going to get 20 offers, instantly. And so the competition becomes very, very fierce. So we've seen South Carolina offer some, Cameron Johnson from Houston, they'd offered. Cortland Ford, who was a Southern Cal transfer, he actually committed to Kentucky, was a guy with left tackle experience they were involved with. And Jaden Muskrat, the Tulsa transfer, he actually committed to Auburn. I think that was yesterday. He was a guy they were a little bit involved with too. So there has been some digging around in the portal on offensive linemen, but it's kind of a tougher market. And right now, I'm not sure that there's a guy that I could definitively outline, especially with the window having closed and nobody except for graduates jumping in now.
Right. And we got some more sound from Beamer that we'll get to a little bit more as the week goes along. On the other side of the break, though, it's often been said there's no greater gig than being a recently fired college football head coach. And as the numbers suggest, that's becoming more and more prevalent as the years go by. We'll talk about that next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. 107.5 The Game.
All right, so switching and saving. You may not be thinking about switching a lot, but you probably are thinking about saving pretty often. And you can do that actually with your insurance. Again, insurance, not a product you're sitting around thinking about, wondering about. But do you know that you can actually save potentially up to 30% with name brand insurance? You can actually do that. If you want to give Amy Mason Cup State Farm a call or visit her website at amymasoncup.com, you can actually ask her or look up information about getting the Drive Safe and Save app. It has interactive maps, it has driving tips, it can help you save up to 30% on your premiums. Amy Mason Cup State Farm can make it easy to switch and save, just like my family did. We called Amy and she took care of the rest. She's got an experienced, knowledgeable, responsive, and very helpful team. She's a South Carolina native and a local agent. Her office, after all, is right down the road here off of I-26, 612 St. Andrews Road. All sorts of insurance products, auto, business, boat, home, renters, life. Any insurance needs, she can give you a personalized quote to meet your needs and help you save. And you can ask her, as far as your auto insurance, about the Drive Safe and Save app. Again, that's Amy Mason Cup State Farm. AmyMasonCup.com, MASINCUPP.com, or give her a call. 803-772-5554. When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
An important message from Blue Ridge Hospice. There may be several hospices now claiming to serve the area, but Blue Ridge Hospice is the only local hospice that has been serving here for 40 plus years, operates the only hospice inpatient care center, conducts the only community-wide grief and bereavement programs, offers a nationally recognized music therapy program in conjunction with Shenandoah University, outscores every other Virginia hospice in Medicare's quality scores, and so much more. Blue Ridge Hospice, the first, the best. Find out more at blueridgehospice.org.
How much?
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head. On your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5 The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on 107.5 Game. Tyler Head and Chris Clark along with you. This story came out on On3 yesterday by Andy Witchery, and the title of it is Power 5 Football Buyouts Reach Second Highest Total Ever in the Fiscal Year of 2022. And that exact number for the fiscal year of 2022 ended up being $90.6 million, and that's shared between the 52 public Power 5 institutions. And that's how much they all collectively spent on buyouts to former coaches, ones that have been fired and so forth, through the fiscal year of 2021 to 2021 to 2022. Now, while that number is technically lower than the highest total of 2018, which was $98.8 million, when you factor in inflation, it actually comes out to even more, because in 2018, that $90.8 million would have factored to $116 million in today's money.
Not enough money for players to get paid, then.
I guess not.
Definitely not. Look, something, and it's hard to say what, something's going to change with the model. And that sounds a little bit silly to say, because some things have already changed with the, if you want to call it, the amateur model.
Yeah.
The advent of NIL, summer of 2021. It's in some ways messy. Definitely not as messy as people would have had you think. It has not caused, the NCAA's alarmist rhetoric about people turning off the television because players now have the ability to get some compensation. That has not happened. In fact, the ratings have gone up. You look at the NCAA basketball tournament, you look at college football, it's still thriving. So that's not an argument. The argument that there's not enough money to go around is not an argument, because schools are spending tons of money, as this illustrates, on buyouts. But the market is, something about the financial model is going to have to change, probably on a larger scale, right? Because it is true that athletic departments are incentivized to spend the money that they get. They're going to put it into facilities. They're going to put it into coach buyouts, into bigger contracts, travel budgets. There's all sorts of things that they can put it into, and they're incentivized to do that. But if you look at, for instance, the idea of revenue sharing, most people think this is coming in some form or fashion. How we get there, we'll see. But athletes getting revenue from conferences as a revenue share, well, that's going to deplete, for instance, the money that goes to the actual schools themselves. And so they're spending more money than ever on these buyouts. So will there be some type of market adjustment in how these contracts are structured, Tyler? They've definitely not gone in that direction.
Right.
Continues to go up. The buyout terms get more and more favorable for the coaches, not the institutions. It seems like ADs are negotiating basically against themselves sometimes. And you're kind of either firing a coach or extending him nowadays.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you kind of put all these numbers in perspective. And one of the teams that is ranked the highest in the amount of money that they're putting into buyouts for that fiscal year is Florida. Their total number was $15.23 million. You think back to Dan Mullen's buyout, which totaled at $12 million, and it was one of those cases where he was owed about half of that within the first 30 days, but he continues to get $1 million installments over the next handful of years. kind of turning back the clock a little bit, you go back to 2005, which this article references a little bit later on, when you were just on the heels of Ron Zook being fired at Florida. They were spending a total of $2.7 million in that fiscal year for their buyouts. And again, that was right around the same time that Spurrier was getting hired here at South Carolina for $1.25 million, I think.
Yeah.
That's what Dow Loggins is making coming in as the offensive coordinator now. Like, that shows you the drastic difference in just 20 years of where coaches are getting paid at big-time institutions, and a big name like Steve Spurrier, who came in here obviously with a national championship under his belt. That pales in comparison to what the, Nick Sabans, the Dabo Sweeneys, the Kirby Smarts are making now in the neighborhood of like $12 million. And obviously none of those guys are going to be getting fired anytime soon, but their buyouts would be absolutely astronomical. And you look at the Brian Harsons getting hired at Auburn a couple years ago and then firing him really quickly. He has a massive buyout and so on and so forth. Like, it's just, like you said, these ADs and athletic departments are almost kind of betting against themselves, saying, all right, we think this is going to be our guy, and if we're wrong, we're willing to pay this guy $15 million to leave town in 3 years.
Yeah, and you feel like you have to do that because agents are really good at convincing ADs that sometimes through the media, sometimes directly, other schools want this coach, or this coach, he may walk away, and so you need huge dollars up front, but then it's the buyouts on the back end that really hurt you. If you're winning, Tyler,
yeah,
who cares? I mean, if you're Georgia, Kirby Smart at $10 million a year is a bargain.
Sure.
I mean, that's a big salary, right? Now, the problem would be if, and this isn't going to happen, I don't think, or nobody thinks this, but if Kirby Smart won 6 games the next 3 years and they got to run him out of town, then it's a problem.
Right.
But it's almost like you have to, these buyouts a lot of times are percentage based. Jimmy Sexton, who represents every coach in the world, not really, but certainly in the SEC, he kind of has a stranglehold. He's like the kingmaker. He's mentioned in that On3 story that you referenced, Tyler, and he actually, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Jimbo Fisher, he represented Will Muschamp when he was here. He actually filed a declaration on behalf of the NCAA and the conferences that are defendants in this court case is pretty important, House versus NCAA. And of course, Jimmy Sexton has a stake in all this because he's representing these coaches.
Sure.
But a lot of the coaching buyouts, 75%, if you hear of a 60% buyout on the total life of the contract, that's tiny nowadays.
Yep.
60% is almost unheard of. It's gone to 75%. There are some coaches in the SEC that literally have a 100% buyout.
Think about Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah.
Signed the 10-year, $100 million deal.
Guaranteed.
And they haven't been playing too great. And if they have a disastrous season this year, there are going to be people calling for him to be fired, to which at that point, he's been there 3-4 years now, they would owe him like $60 million.
Yeah.
It's insane.
And they they have more money than others, obviously, and they flaunt it. But it's tough, but to lure somebody like Jimbo Fisher there in the first place, nowadays you feel like, not even feel like, you do have to give out a giant contract. And if you give out a giant contract and Jimmy Sexton's on the other end, you're normally giving out a big old buyout too.
Yep.
Look at Shane Beamer. South Carolina got Shane Beamer on a bargain, and there were a lot of reasons for that. It was during COVID. He was a first-time head coach. He wanted this job badly. They really got a bargain, and that was at, $2.75 million. 2 years later, and he's done a great job with this program, that number darn near triples.
Mm-hmm.
It's well over double. And now he's got a contract that's a great contract for him. But it's still in the bottom third of the SEC. It's not
low end.
It's not a super big contract. Fortunately for South Carolina, there's like the good news, bad news kind of dynamic here. If you look back before, I guess it would be 2020, right? There was not a lot of buyout money going around at South Carolina. They paid a Darren Horn buyout back in the day. It wasn't big, but they had really almost uncanny stability in the biggest sports in basketball. You had Dave Odom. You had Darren Horn, who you did fire, but that wasn't an exorbitant payment. And then you had Frank Martin come in, and he stayed a long time, and he found some success, enough success to stay around for a long time. At South Carolina, before Will Muschamp, who you had for several years, you had Steve Spurrier, who spent, 10, 11 seasons at South Carolina, 2005 through part of 15, and he walked away. You didn't have to fire him. Lou Holtz, didn't have to fire him. So you've got this stable period in men's basketball for the most part, but definitely for football, where you're on the very low end from buyouts. That really, really helps your numbers. Some schools, like Auburn, for instance, paid out tons of money. Tennessee, think about all the football coaches they cycled through. Let's just try this guy. You're paying tons of buyout money. So that's the good news for South Carolina. They did have that stability. Bad news is, on the flip side, 2020, you have to fire Will Muschamp. 2022, you have to fire Frank Martin. And so South Carolina's listed in this On 3 story. 6 schools last fiscal year reported it spending at least $1 million on men's basketball buyouts. So Maryland was in there. That was the highest, over $5 million. But South Carolina was on the lower end of that, but it was still $3 million.
Right.
And then you think about the Will Muschamp buyout, which ended up being, after negotiations, what was it, 12 and a half, call it $13 million.
Right.
That drives that number up for 2 coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come back on the other side, wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, touching a little bit more on this article referencing buyouts of college football coaches. We'll be right back.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. 107.5, The Game.
So at somebody's house the other day who's not a client of Integrated Media, and you know what I saw up on the television, Tyler? It was the dreaded, I think you could call it the circle of death.
Mm-hmm.
The buffering signal. You don't want it. I don't have it at my house because the guys at Integrated Media, Michael and Nathan, help me not only mount my TV, but make sure everything is running well. So lots of sports to stream nowadays. You probably got multiple devices in your home between your desktop, laptop, multiple TVs. Maybe if you got kids, they're working on their tablets, they're working on their Chromebooks. You want to make sure that you have enough internet bandwidth to keep everything up and running, and you want your setup to look good in the process. Integrated Media can help you do all that. Their services range everything from, again, something as simple as mounting as a TV to an entire smart home system, home theater, audio and video, security and cameras. They can help you control everything from the push of a button on your smartphone, from your security to all of your devices. That's integratedmediainc.com. And if you want to get some examples and some inspiration photos, check out their Facebook, check out their Instagram. That's Integrated Media Columbia with underscores in between the 3 words. You can get some inspiration there and see what they can do for you. IntegratedMediaInc.com, or give our friends Michael and Nathan a call, 803-948-8327. That's Integrated Media.
Who tops the list for having the most money tied up in buyouts for this fiscal year? Find out next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head. On your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5, The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler and Chris along with you for a few more minutes on this Tuesday morning. Continue our conversation about all the money that is tied up in coaching buyouts for Power 5 football programs. Again, these are only the public institutions that are being reported on this. Schools like Notre Dame, Northwestern, Vanderbilt, they're all private. They don't have to put these numbers out. We don't know what Clark Lee makes in a year because it's a private number because they're a private institution. This might surprise you. The school that has the most money tied up in the 2021-2022 fiscal year in buyouts is actually the University of Washington. And a lot of that is tied up in Jimmy Lake, who had a $9.9 million buyout after being fired at the end of the 2021 season. It's interesting, the deal with Jimmy Lake, because if you remember, he got suspended for shoving a player during a game and was fired a week later. That was not fired with cause, though, and they still had to pay him his full buyout.
Not a good deal.
No.
And
because that was only his second year there.
2020, they played 4 games. So he was 3-1 that year. And then you finished 4-5 overall under his leadership, actually, that year. As you said, he got fired mid-year. That's a bad deal.
Very
But
bad.
again, and it's not like, if you said, okay, Washington hired Jimmy Lake, and he had been a head coach for 15 years, and he cut his teeth at some smaller school or maybe a group of 5 school, and in order to lure him away, you had to give him this big contract. That wasn't the case.
Right.
He was an assistant on the staff under Chris Peterson, and he got eventually promoted to the job.
Yeah, it was like the blessing of Chris Peterson almost got him that money, essentially.
Yeah.
It's like we feel like, if Peterson trusts him enough, we're going to give him this. Again, you're betting on yourself, basically, or you're having a bet with yourself as the athletic department, like, hey, we think this guy's going to be just as good, if not better than Chris Peterson. We're going to sink all this money into him, and if we're wrong, we'll pay him $10 million. And, well, that's exactly what happened.
They ended up being wrong. And in fact, Tyler, you may have mentioned this exact number earlier, but, $17 million on football buyouts for Washington. I mean, that is just an absolutely huge number. You're used to seeing Auburn being at the top of that list.
Yep.
There was actually an ESPN story that came out. I believe this was after the 2020 season. And the top 10 schools at that point, South Carolina actually made, I don't really mean that in a good way, they actually made that list because they had to pay out $18.6 million in buyouts. But at that time, Tyler, Auburn was at $31.2 million in basically dead money, is how you can think of it, from 2010 until past 2020. That was because $18 million had been paid to Gene Chizik and Gus Malzahn. And so that was even before the Brian Harsin era at Auburn. So they weren't the highest last year. They reported, $7.8 million. Mm-hmm. It's tied, of course, I would assume, almost totally to the football staff.
Yeah, they're still paying Malzahn, by the way. They still got a couple more years on that.
Double dipping.
Yep.
A couple more years?
I think maybe 1 or 2 years, because his last year would have been, was it 19? Was that his last year?
Fired football coach, man.
I'm telling you. And he gets paid about $2.5 million per year from Auburn, while he's still making money down at UCF.
Making plenty of money down in Orlando, hanging out at Disney World, coaching football.
I'm waiting for the day that we get a Bobby Bonilla type of contract or a buyout for a coach where it's like, yeah, we'll pay you $1 million or $5 million for the next 30 years or something like that if we have to fire you.
They might have to start doing that. Like, you have seen some creativity. Like, you've seen, I can't remember if it was a head coach or just a coordinator. I want to say it was a coordinator, and I can't remember the school. Like, he contracted with the school.
Mm-hmm.
They pay his LLC.
Yeah.
So it's not him. They pay his LLC. We might have to see, again, going back to the point in our previous segment, schools, they have lots of money coming in, right? But now, increasingly, they are being pulled in some different directions, and they are going to have more decisions to make. So whereas schools were pouring $50 million into facilities and buyouts and things like that, they're going to have to divert that money to some other places. And so one of the ideas may be, hey, how can we get more creative with some of these contracts?
And off of that, because a lot of this money does come from donors. So when you talk about, the school like Auburn, we know they have their ties to that Tim Cook guy with Apple and a lot of other, notable alumni and stuff like that. When the donors are putting in more and more of this money to pay the salaries of these coaches, when they're not happy, you hear from them and like, hey, it's our money going into this. And if they want somebody fired, they're going to get somebody fired. That's why we see all this turnover at Florida over the past couple of years, because all these donors say, hey, we're the ones helping you pay this salary. If we don't want this guy here, fire him. And, Jay and Terry brought this up yesterday. Billy Napier has a 5-win season this year. He might be on the chopping block at the end of 2023, and that's another buyout they're having to deal with. Yeah,
it's just a cycle, and they're not going to accept at Florida. And they shouldn't.
Right.
They're not going to accept 5 wins. But we'll have to talk more about this, Tyler. Charlie Baker, new president of the NCAA, he wrote, I guess you could call it an op-ed, recently. Last week, actually, it came out. We haven't really talked about this yet, but just the direction that Division I schools are being basically mandated to pay some different things for student athletes, which I personally don't have a problem with. It is going to force some decision making, and so it'll be interesting to see how these big schools with these big budgets, how they start reallocating some things.
And we will touch on that tomorrow. Maybe Wes will join us tomorrow. Who knows? But we'll talk about that tomorrow on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with Jay and Terry coming up next. 107.5 The Game.
Make a difference. Relish a great work-life balance. Enjoy generous benefits and competitive pay. Go home each night feeling fulfilled by your work. Work for an employer of choice. Work for Blue Ridge Hospice. We're always looking to hire compassionate RNs, CNAs, or anyone interested in office or thrift shop work. We've been your not-for-profit community hospice since 1981. Visit our website for more information or to apply today at blueridgehospice.org. That's blueridgehospice.org. Blue Ridge Hospice is an equal opportunity employer.